You know, the forthcoming Moon Knight series presents me with a bit of an interesting predicament. Normally, when something new in the MCU is coming out, my friends and family usually turn to me to tell them about the character and give my thoughts about what they should expect from the show or movie or whatever. But Moon Knight is one of those characters that tends to keep to himself, kinda doing his own thing. So figuring out what kind of things we could see in the show is rather tough because I can't rely on other MCU connections as much. So instead, I've had to start looking at his solo series, which got me thinking about his rogues gallery and how most of them are pretty unique to just him. Most Marvel villains tend to cross over between heroes at least a little bit, but that's not really the case with anybody that Moon Knight fights. So who are his villains? And who among them are the most dangerous? Well, in this video, I'm going to take a look at a small handful of them and rank them by how much of a threat to MK that they pose. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. There's a bit of a trend you will notice with Moon Knight's rogues gallery. There aren't a ton of women in it. Stained Glass Scarlet here is actually the only one that appears on this list. Solo, at least. Guess that means that she's the one that broke the glass ceiling. Yeah, glass puns. Love it. Now it's going to get considerably less funny, or cringy, depending on your view on puns. Scarlet Fasanera was a woman who grew up in a very abusive home, which she managed to escape by becoming a nun, and then marrying a man who also wound up being extremely abusive. Yes, it's fairly easy to understand why she might be a little bit angry after that. And I know what you're probably thinking right now. Wait, nuns can marry? Yeah, they can. But the question that you should really be asking is, who would marry a nun and then beat them? A monster. That's who. She wound up getting the best of her abusive husband, however, as he wound up falling down the stairs at the church, which killed him. With all due respect, which in the case of an abusive woman-beating jerk isn't much, good riddance. She eventually became a bit of a vigilante in her own right, which is where she came into conflict with Moon Knight for the first time. But she was eventually killed by police while resisting arrest in the very same church where her husband died. After her death, word of her deeds spread, and some began to worship her as a sort of patron saint of abused women, which allowed her to be resurrected magically as a being made completely out of stained glass, granting her the ability to control shards of glass and effectively making her immortal. Honestly, the only reason why she isn't much higher on this list is the fact that she's much more of a hero than she is a baddie, making her much less of a threat to Moon Knight. Otherwise, she'd come in at least number 2, if not number 1. Cause, you know, she's basically a god. Kind of. She's actually been referred to as a lesser god in the comics, but, you know, close enough. What is a Batman-esque hero without a thief to chase down? Only in this case, Moon Knight is probably not going to be proposing to Midnight Man like Batman did to Catwoman, especially after he died of cancer. Midnight Man, not Moon Knight. Moon Knight's fine. Anton Mogart, aka Midnight Man, started out his career as an art thief rather successfully, going on a bit of a spree in New York City that only came to an end when Moon Knight showed up and stopped it by dropping him into a river, which then led into the sewers where all the waste down there melted a large portion of Mogart's face, leaving him horribly disfigured. Metal. Naturally, he blamed Moon Knight for this and vowed vengeance on him, no matter the cost. Teaming up with Bushman, who we'll get to in a second here, don't worry, Midnight Man hatched a scheme to try to defeat Moon Knight, which didn't end super well, as despite being able to hold his own against Moon Knight, Mogart ultimately lost and was once again dropped into the river and washed away. You know, all that toxic waste and the rest of the crap that's in that river probably might have had something to do with him developing cancer later on in life. All that stuff just could not be good for him. As if him having half of his face melted off didn't clue you into that enough already. Basically what I'm saying is stay away from pretty much any body of water in New York City. They are admittedly cleaner than they used to be, but still probably a little bit too gross for you to go swimming around in them. Unless you want to become a supervillain, then maybe that might be an option for you. I still wouldn't advise it. Just, you know, legally I shouldn't be telling you to jump into a river. In fact, this is me actually telling you not to, so don't do it. Little bit of a legal disclaimer there for you. Straight from the lawyers. You know, it really seems like Mark Spector's past life as a mercenary gave him two things: the skills necessary to serve as an effective vigilante, and a heaping helping of bad guys to deal with. As is the case with this entry, Raoul Bushman. Bushman here was someone that once worked with Spector back in the day, though their first mission together didn't exactly end well. After that, though, the two wound up working together a few more times before Bushman actually betrayed Spector and killed a target the two were meant to protect. Bushman then went on to become a bit of a small-time crime boss in New York City, where he came into contact with Moon Knight, who he became borderline obsessed with taking down. The two actually fought on numerous occasions over the years, and despite not actually being superpowered himself, Bushman actually did a pretty good job against ol' MK, proving to be a true threat to him just with his combat prowess alone. And you know, the fact that he had hired goons also didn't hurt. I mean, it hurt MK, but that's beside the point. That is, right up until Bushman died. Then he was resurrected and just became even more of a pain in the butt. Now, Bushman might not seem like much at first glance, but don't let the big belly fool you. He has been a massive thorn in Moon Knight's side throughout his entire career in the comics, and odds are, he's probably going to continue to be so in the future, if I had to venture a guess. Hey, wait, Mr. Video Man, didn't you already include Midnight Man on this list? Why, yes, I did, disembodied comment voice that sounds suspiciously like my own, but Midnight Man and Midnight are two separate characters. I can understand the confusion given the similar names, but they are separate individuals, completely independent of each other. Well, okay, not completely independent of each other, since you could sort of argue that Midnight is just Midnight Man 2, since Jeff Wilde here is actually the son of Anton Mogart, that original Midnight Man. So I'm still gonna consider them separate entries for the sake of this list, largely just because Midnight here is far more kick-ass than Midnight Man, and they're different enough in what they're capable of that they might as well be separated. Cool? Cool. Initially serving as a partner of sorts for Moon Knight, kinda like Robin to MK's Batman, Wilde was seemingly killed by the Secret Empire. At least, that's what Moon Knight thought. In reality, he was captured and rebuilt into a flippin' cyborg by the organization, who was basically brainwashed by them to begin serving them. Though, honestly, it didn't actually wind up taking that much to brainwash him, since he was kinda angry at Moon Knight for leaving him to die. At least that's the way that he saw it. Eventually, after the Secret Empire was dealt with, Moon Knight started to hear about a string of murders, where the victim's blood was used to draw a clock with the hands pointing to midnight after the fact. Initially, he thought that Midnight Man might be back in action, understandably. But it was revealed instead that it was Wilde, who was seeking vengeance against Moon Knight for leaving him to die at the hands of the Secret Empire. See, I told you he was angry. And Wilde proved to be incredibly difficult to take down, since, you know, he was a cyborg with robotic arms and super strength now, even getting crazy close to taking out Moon Knight at one point. Though MK did ultimately get the better of him when he killed him by taking the hands off of a clock and jamming it into his face, which might just be the most appropriate death in all of comics. Almost, arguably, too appropriate. Little bit on the nose there, guys. And despite the fact that this is a comic character that we're talking about here, he is actually yet to resurface since his apparent death in 2007. That being said, I would not be surprised if he gets brought back someday in the future. And if he does, they'll probably give Moon Knight a run for his money. Probably. Again, he's a cyborg. Which would also make it kind of easy probably to bring him back. Install a Ryzen 5000 series processor in his head or something and call it good. It's really hard to not include an entire team of villains on this list. Even if including the Zodiac Cartel on here is kind of cheating, since they are arguably more Defenders foes than just Moon Knight. Though Moon Knight did play a pretty critical role in taking them out, so to me that makes them valid to include on this list. The Zodiac Cartel was an organization made up of 12 members, each named after the different astrological signs under which they were born, and each leading their own criminal empires independent of the cartel. While the members were not themselves superpowered, their great fortunes allowed them to be able to afford technology that granted them special abilities, making them capable of standing standing against the combined might of the Defenders and even the Avengers on a few different occasions. Moon Knight, however, was integral in the eventual downfall of the cartel, being the one who hunted down the final member to fall, as well as many of the ones that came before. Though I guess technically there is still one member running around, though at this point he's aligned with Kang, which puts him just a little bit outside of Moon Knight's wheelhouse. Not saying that Moon Knight wouldn't try to fight Kang and his forces, but it might be a bit above his pay grade. Their strength though, and the reason why they're so high on this list, really comes down to their numbers, however. And that makes sense, honestly. Unless you're a cosmic being, an angry titan, or a time-traveling dude who uses technology from the future, you're really not going to be standing toe-to-toe with a super team like the Defenders or the Avengers by yourself. And that is why the Zodiac Cartel takes this spot on this list. How could I not include Werewolf by Night on a list of Moon Knight's greatest foes? I mean, come on, MK literally first appeared in a Werewolf by Night solo comic. Now yes, old Shaggy here, as I'm choosing to call him, isn't really a villain necessarily. At least not one in the traditional sense. And yes, he has even served on some teams of heroes, such as the Midnight Suns. There I go, I have reached my Midnight Suns quota for this video. However, he has on a few different occasions tangled with Moon Knight, so arguably I think he belongs on this list. Powers wise, Shaggy is exactly what you would expect from a traditional werewolf, which shouldn't be a surprise to pretty much anyone, because that is basically exactly what he is. Being stricken with lycanthropy since a young age, brought about because of a curse placed upon his family line, he possesses the usual super strength, super speed, and lycan form that you would expect. However, old Shaggy can control his transformation to a certain degree, allowing him to also retain his human mind and intelligence while in his wolf form, which I guess makes him a bit better than your typical werewolf. He's not the biggest threat to Moon Knight, however, largely because he is more often than not a hero, or at least an anti-hero. He's a man that ultimately means well, probably the easiest way to explain his motivations. Anyone who has a brother or sister can tell you that sibling rivalries can get really nasty, especially when your older bro becomes a serial killer and then a darker version of your superhero alter ego. Ah, you know, that old chestnut. I feel like many of us have been there before. I mean, come on. Tale as old as time. Randall Spector was Mark's older brother. Earlier on in life, the two brothers were very close, even joining the military, then serving as mercenaries together. However, at one point, Rand betrayed Mark and wound up killing a woman that Mark had been involved with. This led to the first proper conflict between the two, which ended with Mark believing that he had killed Rand with a hand grenade. Naturally, as you would expect in comics, he actually survived this, and went on to become a notorious serial killer known as Hatchet Man. You can probably guess how he liked to deal with his victims. He used a machete, naturally. No, of course not. He used a hatchet. Eventually, he was properly killed by the Punisher, only to then get resurrected by the Hellbent, who granted him similar powers to Moon Knight and the mantle of Shadow Knight. So yeah, he's basically an evil version of Moon Knight. Nothing super exciting there. But for the most part, every superhero has an evil version of themselves in their rogues gallery, so it was kind of to be expected at some point. Oh, come on, you know it's true. Spider-Man has Venom, Iron Man has Ironmonger, Superman has Zod. It's a classic villain trope. It's the whole idea of, hey, we need a new villain. Let's just have a character who is the hero, but evil. It's cliche, but you can't tell me that it doesn't work. You know, though, most heroes only really have one evil counterpart within their home reality. Moon Knight, however, seems to be unlucky enough to have a second one, in the form of Moonshade. Moonshade was a sort of darker, twisted version of Moon Knight created by mages, the evil future version of Adam Warlock, in the midst of the Infinity War event in the comics. Moonshade initially teamed up with a dark doppelganger of Reed Richards, before setting off on his own to travel throughout the multiverse, hell-bent on absorbing the life essence of all of the alternate universe versions of Moon Knight. in order to boost his own power level. And he was fairly successful for quite a while, apparently working his way through the multiverse to the point that he was down to the last 2 remaining Moon Knights by the time Spectre caught up to him. At least that's what he claimed. The multiverse is literally infinite, so I kinda doubt that there were only 2 left. The point is though, he managed to absorb quite a few other Moon people, which caused his power levels to spike significantly. However, it apparently still wasn't enough, as a team up of Moon Knight and Moon Man from Earth 42992 were able to put an end to the monster's horrific rampage, effectively putting Moonshade out of commission. And he hasn't popped up since, but this is comics that we're talking about here, so he could come back tomorrow, and honestly I wouldn't be that surprised. That being said, even if he is gone forever, this guy managed to take out countless versions of Moon Knight, and while he couldn't finish off the OG, that's gotta count for something. As far as I'm concerned, that makes Moonshade the biggest threat to Moon Knight out of his entire rogues gallery. At least, that's the case for now. As time rolls on and we're introduced to more and more characters, that might change, but for now, Moonshade takes the top spot. Hey everybody, I'm John Algetz. I made this video and I want to know what you think. How would you rank Moon Knight's Rogues Gallery? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for even more great videos just like this one in the future.